Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining Insights into Circularity with the Recycling Market Center. We started these webinars some time ago and occasionally host an Insights into Circularity webinar. So we have the opportunity to directly meet with an executive or owner of a company, in some cases both, and really wanted to facilitate a personal introduction as well as a bit of industry discussion with a thought leader in this area, be it manufacturing of recycled content product or also circularity and circular systems. And in doing this, equally do it in such a way that as you meet these people virtually, and you see the individual at a conference, you see the individual at a meeting, perhaps there's not quite as much of a personal anxiety or professional anxiety to engage a conversation or a meaningful opportunity. So with that, we're pleased today to have David LaFiura with us. David is the president of Ultra Poly Corporation, multiple locations here in Pennsylvania, but primarily anchored in Portland, Pennsylvania, in northeastern Pennsylvania near the Delaware Water Gap. And today we're going to build insights into his company, a bit of the plastics industry in general, where things are going with plastics on a circular basis, and then equally, again, a little bit of his interest. So with that, David, I thank you for joining us. One other note of housekeeping before I start: you do have in your view bar Q&A block. If you would have a question for David, please make an opportunity to type in your question, and if we have time for it and we can fit it into the discussion, we will. So with that, David, would you please give us an introduction of yourself as well as Ultra Poly Corporation? I'm sure not everyone on the call has heard of Ultra Poly, and likewise, perhaps the position that you occupy in the marketplace.
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, Bob, I want to thank you for hosting me on this webinar. This is a great experience for me, and I am more than willing to talk to anybody who wants to talk about plastic circularity at any conference that anybody sees me at. So that being said, as Bob mentioned, my name is Dave LaFiura, and I am the president of Ultra Poly Corporation. We're based here in Portland, Pennsylvania, and we've been around for just over 50 years. So I'll give you a little bit of background on my company, and I'll tell you a little bit of background on myself, and then from there we can get into a discussion. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions that might come up from the audience as well. So to start, Ultra Poly just passed its 50th anniversary on May 8th of 2024. So that's been an exciting milestone for us. So the company was started in 1974 by my father, Alan, who at the time was selling recycled resin, he was selling virgin resin into the film manufacturers in the New York metropolitan area. So the guy's making garbage bags, garment bags, and other types of polyethylene film. So the oil crisis hit, and that became the first time it was economical to recycle these manufacturers' plant scrap. So the birth of Ultra Poly occurred when we started toll recycling, toll pelletizing plastic manufacturers' polyethylene scrap. So that involved us taking their scrap, chopping it up, melting it down, pelletizing it, turning it back into resin, and then returning it to the source. And that was a service. And the implication there is that we never owned the material. We were only charging a per pound toll in order to recycle the material to make it reusable for the manufacturer again. Now today, that's still about 40% of our total volume. It's an important part of our business. But since the 70s, we have grown in our size and scope. So really the first changes occurred kind of in the early 80s, where we started purchasing companies' excess scrap, and we would blend those materials together to produce ultra-ply branded recycled resins, primarily in polyethylene in the beginning, and then we got more and more involved with polypropylene through the course of the 80s and 90s. Now today, our breakdown in terms of materials is about 45% polyethylene, 45% polypropylene, and we're now involved with some other materials like PVC and nylon. But those are new for us. The vast majority of our history, we've been recyclers of essentially olefins, polyethylene and polypropylene. Now, the equipment used to toll recycle and the equipment used to compound or produce an ultra-ply branded resin that we're selling to third parties is essentially the same. Process is the same. The difference is that in one case, the toll case, we don't own the material. In the compounding case, we do own the material. So again, we're blending materials together. We're producing ultra-ply branded recycled resins, and those resins are made to order. So they're customized for our customers' applications, and they're available in an ongoing, consistent basis. So essentially, we consider ourselves the last step in the recycling value chain. So we provide, we are a resin supplier first, right, and kind of a recycler second. So we are not beholden to any one stream that we might be procuring. We are supplying recycled resins that match specific characteristics on an ongoing basis, even though our base of raw materials might change over time, depending on the market situation. I guess by the numbers, in terms of statistics, we are in the top 5 largest plastics recyclers in the country based on production capacity. So our annual capacity now is approaching about 350 million pounds a year. We have 5 plants, all in the state of Pennsylvania. We have our 2 headquarters plants here in Portland, where we're employing upwards of 150 people, and we're shipping about 1 million pounds a day worth of resin out of these 2 plants here in Portland. And then we have 3 embedded tolling operations where we have equipment and personnel and maintenance and management inside our host companies, where we are toll recycling their scrap on an ongoing basis within their facilities. So that the advantage to that is we're cutting out the cost of trucking. So it makes a lot of sense if there's customers out there who are generating, significant volumes of scrap that's recoverable on an annual basis, that model can work. Company-wide, we employ about 220 million people. 220 people. I guess a little bit more about where we've been and where we're going. I mentioned that we've focused primarily on post-industrial scrap over the past 50 years. So this is scrap that's generated by a process. I'm guessing that many of you might know what I mean by that, but to the extent there's questions, I'm happy to clarify. Post-consumer scrap is what most people think of when they think of recycling. So this would be your curbside recycling, the used water bottles and detergent bottles that you put out on your curb for recycling. We historically have not done much of that. However, in the past 10 years, we've seen quite a bit of demand growth in that area. And we are sensitive to that, and we are moving to meet that demand. So if you would ask me what our largest source of growth is currently and into the probably next 5 to 10 years, I would say that it is in the production and supply of post-consumer resin. So that this is plastic resin, polyethylene and polypropylene again, that is produced from post-consumer scrap streams. That's new for us, but today we are currently we're probably producing maybe 15 to 20 million pounds a year of post-consumer recycled resin, which makes us one of the largest PCR suppliers in the country, actually. But even though it is a relatively small portion of what we do in total. The streams that we're recycling on the post-consumer side are not what we consider traditional. So when most people think of post-consumer recycling, probably within the industry and beyond the industry, they think of water bottles, PET, or they think of detergent bottles or milk bottles, which is high density polyethylene or baled number twos. In both cases, those streams are coming through a MRF. So from the curbside, they are picked up at the household. They go to a municipal recycling facility where they're commingled with fiber and glass and metals, and they're separated into commodities and then baled as an output. So companies like Envision Plastics and KW Plastics, which are household names within the recycling industry, those companies are buying baled number twos or baled high density polyethylene bottles coming from MRFs. Major MRF operators like Waste Management and Republic Services. Again, these are companies that the general public typically knows. We are not buying those bales. We are not competing with Envision and KW for those materials. That is a highly commoditized business where volume is key. And in order to be successful there, you need to really focus on keeping your production cost per pound extremely low in order to be efficient. We're focused more on non-traditional streams that involve kind of a grassroots collection effort. So I'm thinking about geomembrane, which is a material used in the oil and gas fracking industry here in the Marcellus Shale and beyond. Actually, Bob is well aware of our efforts in this area. So geomembrane is a material that the Pennsylvania DEP has mandated gets laid down on drilling sites prior to the activity beginning in order to protect the soil from above ground spills, right? What's interesting about that stream is it's laid down with a known expiration date. So once the hole is drilled, the exploration, the oil and gas companies pick that geomembrane up and landfill it, right? In 2010, 2011, we became aware of this stream. We did quite a bit of research into the size of the stream and the potential challenges with processing it. And we developed a process for not only recycling it, but also collecting it. So we have a grassroots collection network in place where we are collecting geomembrane, bringing it back to our plant and recycling it and producing a post-consumer polyethylene utility grade resin that we're selling into the market now. We have similar initiatives going on with car bumpers. So we are currently collecting car bumpers that have been essentially removed at auto body shops and would ordinarily be landfilled. We are collecting those bumpers and we are processing them, pelletizing the material, and then selling that resin to a tier one automotive supplier who's putting it into a part that's going on to a General Motors truck. Actually, the 2500 series heavy duty trucks coming from GM have our recycled plastic on there, which is interesting because that is a completely circular application where we are using post-consumer scrap that is coming from automobiles and putting it back onto an automobile, which we think is a great feather in our cap, and we're quite excited about that. But beyond those two streams, we're also recycling, hoop house, flower pots, lumber wrap, and other streams, which really all share in common two major things. One is that they're homogeneous and large volumes. So these streams, if you think about it, are typically only a handful of components. There's the plastic, of course, but then there's dirt and water and nothing else, really, right? Though the technical challenge with recycling those streams is far lower than if you consider your average MRF film bale, which might contain polyethylene in it and polypropylene, but also probably contains food scraps and rubber bands and paper labels and tape and hundreds of other items, right? So the technical challenge associated with recycling a MRF bale of film is far higher than it is in recycling hoop house or geomembrane or some sort of film that's collected from a known source, right? The other thing that these streams have in common is that they involve what we consider grassroots, homegrown collection efforts where we're in charge of the logistics, we're the ones building the network, we're the ones collecting the material, and these require infrastructure that's really not in place. So they're not coming to us through traditional channels like firms, for example. So that's an area where I'm spending a lot of focus personally in terms of growing that side of our business, the post-consumer resin side of our business. There are various hurdles, which I'm sure we'll get into, but I guess that's a good snapshot of our business. And I can give you a little bit of background on myself, and then from there open up into more of a discussion. So of course, Bob, stop me at any point if you have any questions or you want to interject, that's fine. But I'll continue with just a bit of background on myself. So coming from a family business, as you might expect, I have spent the majority of my life working for Ultra Poly, and that includes when I was a kid. I don't think that child labor laws were as stringent when I was 10 as they are now. But some of my earliest memories are me in the plant on a forklift moving material around. That goes back to when I was a young teenager. I've been around these plants, this equipment, plastic, pretty much my whole life. I started working for Ultra Poly in high school, and I worked for Ultra Poly through college, kind of in the plant on all pieces of equipment that we had, and I kind of was promoted up through the ranks. So I started out as our entry level position, which is a roll cutter. I run grinders, shredders, extruders, kind of in everything in between. After I graduated from college, I took on a management role where I started up our first embedded towing operation out in Bloomsburg for a company called Autoneum, which is the tier 1 automotive supplier. Got that plant up and running, came back to Portland, served as production manager here in Portland. And then I left, went back to school in order to get an MBA, went to work in New York for a few years, and then returned here as a vice president in 2012. And my father retired. I became the president in about 2016, 2017, and I've been here ever since, and I don't envision myself leaving anytime soon. I have no formal background in engineering or polymers, although I have tons of practical experience in the processing of polymers and the production of polymers. I'm not an engineer, but I have worked a great deal in business. So my focus has been in economics and business. So we are certainly caring for the environment. However, we are capitalists first. I think it's safe to say that if something is not economically sustainable, then it is not sustainable for the environment. And here I think a lot about, the cost to reclaim certain streams. If that cost generates a sale price that is above market, then really there's an issue with it being sustainable over the long run. And that cost in many cases is being driven by the amount of fossil fuels that are used throughout the supply chain. So I'm thinking about these collection efforts where people are collecting used candy wrappers from schools or used drink pouches from schools. The amount of cost that goes into collecting that material is a proxy for the amount of fossil fuels used to collect that material. And you have to wonder if over time, doing those types of collection campaigns is really actually beneficial to them. So this type of thinking frames our strategy now and into the future. We need for our projects to be economically viable and profitable in order for them to work and be sustainable for the future. So that's a bit about my background. But today, on a day-to-day basis, I worry about, I control investment strategy and capital. So I have two younger brothers who are involved in the business, and they are in charge of sales and business development, so buying and selling of raw materials and finished products, and then running our operations.
Well, David, so that's quite an enthusiastic, comprehensive introduction. Very much appreciated, and I guess there's any one of a number of thoughts that I have after hearing all that. Well, let's start back at the beginning. You said that you've built over the last, say, decade your polypropylene business, and there's been a push, over the last, say, 5 to 8 years for MRFs to be getting and collecting more polypropylene, primarily by the recycling partnership and funding that their funders have placed out into the marketplace to have for MRFs to have the ability to sort polypropylene post-consumer, obviously. Do you see a grow? Obviously, you won't be in the business, but you see a growing need and trend for the polypropylene, and what products, end products, do you primarily sell that resin to then?
Sure. Yeah. So, okay. We sell our resin into a wide range of industries. So automotive, building products, so like plastic decking, sheet extrusion, film extrusion, drainage pipe, a lot of durable goods, a lot of the goods you see on the shelves at Home Depot and Lowe's and Walmart, those are made from our plastic. So we have a pretty diverse customer base, which is good for us. It keeps us not seasonal in any way, shape, or form. Now, in terms of demand for post-consumer polypropylene, it's absolutely there, without question. We do feel a great deal of tailwinds that's being driven by demand for PCR, primarily from brand owners, the public-facing companies that are producing packaging. And that demand is in turn being driven from not only the general public, but also NGOs like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the like, right? That kind of demand is well publicized. The pledges, the 25% by 25, these post-consumer plastic content pledges have been well publicized. And we believe deeply that these companies, these brand owners, are motivated by those pledges. The issue that we see in general is that there's not as much demand, or really there's very little demand for non-natural post-consumer. So the post-consumer that MRFs are generating, a lot of that is mixed color, which can go into black for the most part. There is other sorting technology available, which we are highly interested in. We've done quite a bit of research on. But a lot of the post-consumer streams coming from MRFs and elsewhere are mixed color, right? If you think about the fraction of packaging that you would purchase, that the general public would purchase, that is natural or clear relative to the fraction of plastics that we purchase that are colored, it's a tiny fraction that's clear. So there's a huge mismatch between the demand for natural PCR and availability of natural PCR. Really what is available is mixed color and black PCR. In order to increase recycling rates, we need to see more demand for non-clear PCR.
And, I think you and I talked briefly before today to say that that's an ongoing struggle between those who manage sustainability systems and profiles within a company and the packaging engineers and those who need to meet packaging compliance obligations too. And that's where you come into play as, can you talk about the balance that you and the role that you play in that regard?
Sure. Yeah. We have a unique perspective on that dynamic, and we see it day in and day out. So we have our feet in two worlds. We are producers of resin, where we are kind of almost we have our engineering hats on first, where we need for our materials to perform as anticipated in the applications for which they were designed. And we care a lot about, cycle times, uptime, the whole 9 yards, right? We need for our customers to be able to run our material, and we provide a great deal of customer service to ensure that that's the case. But on the other hand, we feel demand from the sustainability groups involved, and so we are constantly approached from big brands and other large household name companies that you would know, where the request is for PCR material that they can put in to an application that's going to run like prime version, and those two things don't match, right? So we understand the value of virgin material, and there's a reason people buy it, and it is because it is so tightly spec'd It's so consistent, it's so runnable, it's so efficient to manage. There's not more than one stock keeping unit, right? So if a company is buying clear, they can stock only one or two resins and color it at their press. If a company is buying different colored resins, they might have to stock multiple resins and change what they're running on their lines depending on the product they're making, right? That's a headache for plants, and it's a headache for engineers. We understand that. But on the other hand, the purchasing arm of these organizations is wanting PCR. And they want the natural in order to satisfy their engineers when it's not necessarily available. So there's a constant give and take between what the engineers want in terms of runnability and efficiency and what the sustainability mandates require. They're at odds in many cases. And I can tell you from experience that the plant wins. The engineers win. So we're not at a point yet where companies are prioritizing sustainability over cost. That is not
Interesting. And another question for you. One thing that we've seen evolving in the marketplace, and I don't know if this has touched a business like yours yet, is where traditionally, and I know you say you do a lot of post-industrial, but traditionally with a post consumer MRF, the MRF brings in the material from a collection program. The collection program or generator is compensated. The MRF sorts the material, takes ownership of it, and then sells it onto a broader, commodities exchange and marketplace. We're seeing a growing interest, though, in brand owners stepping in and taking ownership of that material before it hits the MRF, so that they're essentially using the MRF as a toll operation for material that they already own and can already, then kind of put in their piggy bank, so to speak, and bean count that they know they have that, material locked up. Are you at all seeing a trend in that regard, or heard of that type of business model? And what do you think of it?
Boy, that's interesting. I think so. The answer is kind of no. Actually, that's interesting. So I'm well aware of the PET bottle collection initiatives that were driven by Coke and Pepsi over the years, right? So Coke and Pepsi wants their bottles back because they have a bullseye on them from the public for the pollution they're creating, without question, for better or worse. So I'm aware of those, but I'm not aware of anything beyond that. And I think that's quite interesting. I think it's complicated, though. It's hard to dig into that without getting like specific. So I wonder, like, hypothetically, Procter & Gamble wants to get involved in a program like that, where they're driving some collection of their Tide red bottles, for example, maybe, or other detergent bottles. How are they going to affect what you just described? So, like, I could see Procter & Gamble maybe investing in technology that might aid in sorting out that bright red, the Tide red, or something along those lines. But I guess I'm having a little trouble understanding how what you just described would happen in practice. I think it's interesting. But I'm curious to know if you have any idea of like what sorts of technologies are being envisioned. Do you have any specific examples of where that's being?
There's a shift. The primary shift in that regard is with the processing facilities across the country that the closed loop partners now have ownership of. The Balcony series of processors. Sure. They've integrated Sims out of New York as well with their platform. And the brand owners that are funding the back end programs and the educational initiatives and the markets investments that Closed Loop's been involved with are now turning around and saying, okay, we funded the back end, now we want to get it on the front end too. And that's where you see this, I think, where that dynamic is going to be led from. And, certainly something to keep an eye on, I think, and as a possible growing trend. And as long as we're talking about trends, and I know this may be poison to a recycler such as yourself, but we've seen a number of advanced recyclers or chemical recyclers of plastics try to take a foothold in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
At one point in the market center, we had over a dozen prospects in this regard that were talking to us about, where to find material or so forth, and any one of a series of questions. With the basic thought, hey, as you take this material back down into its fundamental, polymeric composition, and the thought being you can then build it up, as a new plastic, a new fuel, a new, really anything of a petroleum or natural gas derivation. What do you think of these types of processes? Are they like I said, I use the word poison? Are they just unfriendly to ultra poly, or do you think
No,
this is something that could be viable?
not necessarily. I think it could be viable. So we are at the eye of this storm. So we are heavily involved with these types of discussions with probably the same folks you are. The guys evaluating making advanced recycling or chemical recycling investments in the state of Pennsylvania. We've been vocal proponents of the technology from the beginning. In fact, going back 10 years, Ultra Poly invested in their own chemical recycling operation here on site. And that investment thesis was driven by the idea that we had many post-industrial toll customers who were generating scrap streams that were unmechanically recyclable. So here I'm thinking about co-laminated films, so polyethylene and nylon laminated films. They're very common, right? Those materials are not recyclable mechanically. So our thought was, why not provide the service of collecting those materials, putting them back to good use through advanced recycling and chemical recycling, and provide that service to our existing toll customer base. And we went as far as to purchase a pyrolysis unit and a genset. The theory was we pyrolyze these unmechanically recyclable streams, turn that into a syngas, and use that syngas to power a genset, which provides electricity to our main plant. So we spent millions of dollars on that technology. We commissioned our pyrolysis unit and our genset in order to do that, and we never achieved success. We ran into a number of roadblocks that we couldn't have foreseen at the outset. First of all, the price of oil dropped in half over the course of our installation, so that hurt the entire investment thesis. But on top of that, the process turned out to be much more sensitive to the bulk density of the stream being introduced, right? So if the bulk density of the material increased, that would initiate a dramatic increase in the temperature of the pyrolysis unit, and then would generate a whipsaw effect when the bulk density decreased, right? So we're constantly chasing the temperature of the pyrolysis unit, and it turned out that we needed the equivalent of chemical engineers operating the unit, not entry-level production. So our cost structure was way out of it. We needed much more educated engineers operating that process than we thought up front. And then finally, we never had a use for the waste heat, right? So in order to make these processes efficient, in our opinion, you need to have a use for the waste heat, which we didn't. Now, fast forward 10 years, and we have been on our soapbox talking about the benefits and the challenges associated with advanced recycling or chemical recycling. We know it. We know the process. In most cases, better than these folks making these investments. We've actually probably advanced recycled more pounds than most of these people that are considering these investments, which is interesting to think about it. But our theory on this, our strategy on this topic has been essentially keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, right? We want to be in the middle of it. We are highly concerned about advanced recycling initiatives taking our otherwise mechanically recyclable scrap. That is counterproductive. That is destroying value. There's no reason for that. That is adding more cost to pounds that should be mechanically recycled, right? So our approach, again, has been one where we want to consult and we want to collaborate with these guys, and we are more than willing to make investments in order to prepare feedstocks for pyrolysis. So we've offered our services in a few different arenas on the side of fuel preparation. So we could be a site where we are preparing unmechanically recyclable feedstocks for pyrolysis or gasification on an ongoing basis, and we could do that in large volumes. And the reason we would be qualified to do that is because we understand the challenges. We're very good at size reduction. We're good at blending. We understand the challenges with varying bulk density. So again, this is something we're aware of. We are highly concerned and sensitive to this risk that you cite, where these advanced recycling businesses are taking up mechanically recyclable scrap. It's a concern, but if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense for mechanical recycling and advanced recycling to be occurring at the same location, because if you're receiving streams that could be sorted, you could have a mechanical recycling facility processing the stream, the part of the stream that's sorted out and is mechanically recyclable, and then you have the advanced recycling piece running what is not mechanically recyclable, and that is the way to drive the most value out of any given stream. So we want to co-locate with advanced recycling. Long story short.
And another topic you brought up was the system you now have in place to recycle car bumpers, and that those bumpers are going back into General Motors automotive products.
Yeah.
Obviously that's where I think the marketplace in general is going, is to establish circular systems. I'm sure you see it that way. Could you elaborate a little bit on how that's functioning, and what was the thought process, the generation of that whole program? Was it did General Motors approached you? Was it of their interest, or what really made that thing spin?
Yeah, no, General Motors did not approach us. I can tell you that. And making that sale turned out to be more challenging than you would think. But so the original impetus came out of the Plastics Industry Association. So Kevin Cronin on our team is a very active member of the Plastics Industry Association, and this concept came out of a program within that industry association, which I think they call MRFF, Materials Recovery for the Future. It's essentially a pilot program where they look at streams, not unlike bumpers, that they think have value and they think might be recyclable, and basically propose these streams to the membership at large. And we looked at it and thought it had legs. So the concept originated with the Plastics Industry Association. When we got involved, there was really no action on it. There was no material flowing. It was not an established business, but the idea came from there. We looked at it, thought it had legs, because again, the quality of the resin produced from car bumpers is extremely high. It's a very durable, very tough polypropylene that has a wide range of potential applications throughout industry. The challenge is collecting the bumpers. So the first thing we had to figure out was, how do we collect the bumpers economically? And the first thing we did was actually we rented a wood chipper that we brought into Ultra Poly. We collected some bumpers through the MRFF, and we pursued the chuck and duck strategy, where you throw the bumper in the wood chipper and jump out of the way. And that was a very loud, very violent process that we determined very quickly was not going to work. Right? We didn't think that the average business was going to appreciate having a wood chipper running bumpers next door to them, right? So that wasn't viable. We looked at a couple other different technologies. Kevin Cronin and I rented a U-Haul straight job where we actually drove out ourselves and drove to auto body shops and collected bumpers over the course of one full day. And we put, I think, 195 bumpers in a 53-foot straight job. No, I'm sorry, a 35-foot straight job. And that put us in touch with the auto body shops, the source in this case. We determined that there's a strong demand to get rid of these bumpers. From there, we knew that there was there was a really receptive supply base, but collecting remained the challenge. Someone on our staff came up with the idea of using garbage trucks. So we actually we piloted that with some waste management company, not waste management, but some local waste haulers that we work with, where we use their garbage trucks to go around and milk run style collection of bumpers from local body shops. And that worked. We were able to get about 6,000 pounds of bumpers on one garbage truck. And here I'm referring to the types of garbage trucks that drive up and down residential streets collecting trash on the pickup days, right? So the ones we're all familiar with. We established enough of a base where we went out and purchased our own garbage truck. Today we have that garbage truck out 5 days a week, doing milk run pickups from body shops in our area. And now there's about 350 body shops in the fold where we're collecting on a regular basis, and that's our supply base. We're augmenting with bales of bumpers that we're purchasing from further away. And we're processing the bumpers much the same way we're running the geomembrane. So we have equipment in-house where we can size reduce it, separate out the metal clips and whatnot on the bumpers and turning it into pellets and selling them. The customer development side of things was its own check. That took its own, the qualification process to get a resin qualified for automotive is long and painful. I had no experience with that heading into it, but thankfully Kevin did, so he was key in that effort. But that's a bit about the background there. It's kind of unique, pretty interesting. It's exciting. We feel like it's a high growth potential business, and we are continuing to invest in it. So.
David, also, we're talking about post-consumer recycling, and as you look to build strength and resource in that area, what have been some of the challenges in looking at processing post-consumer versus post-industrial? I assume that one thing that we always hear about in the market center, and has even been a little bit of conversation with your folks as well, is in wash line technology, and being able to routinely bring up your feedstock to a given quality level. What I know that's a challenge, but I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, or if there have been other challenges as well as you expand that portion of your business.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so there are challenges all along the way. And you've solved one, and then the next one pops up. So solving problems is an ongoing project, right? It's an ongoing effort. I would say, yeah. So the first challenge we had with the streams that we focus on was how to get rid of the dirt, and by extension, it was abrasion, right? So these materials, when we receive them, are incredibly abrasive on our equipment. So if you're going to run them without getting out the dirt and the silica and the sand and the contamination, they are going to wear the heck out of everything in your process, whether that's blades in your shredders and grinders, or whether that's extruder screws in your extrusion equipment. It's an incredibly abrasive raw material to be running. So removing that dirt is the primary challenge. And you can certainly use water to do that. When you use water to wash the material, then you necessarily have to get the material dry, which turns into its own challenge. It's less of a challenge when you're dealing with rigids. So, the most common post-consumer materials that are processed are rigid bottles. That's where you're size reducing detergent bottles. You're producing a rigid flake, washing that with water, and then drying that material relatively easily. That drying process is made easy because you're dealing with a rigid material. It gets a lot more challenging when you're dealing with flexible film. So flexible film can fold over on itself. It's harder to convey. There's all sorts of challenges that exist with film that don't with rigids, that make it harder to dry and harder to handle. So managing those challenges is kind of our next area of focus. Up until now, we've actually cleaned film using a dry process, which is highly unique. That's something that we kind of invented on our own. That involves focusing on adding heat to the plastic in order to dry it and liberate the dust that way. if you think about it, water acts almost like a glue. If something is slightly moist, that creates mud, which can get caked to the plastic. Once you dry that moisture, that liberates the mud, it turns the mud into dust, which is easier to separate from the plastic. That's been our approach to date. But however, we are currently installing a washing system. We're going to begin using water, and we think the big challenge there is going to be getting material. So we haven't yet attacked that, but it's looming. We hope to be kind of working on that challenge within the next couple months.
And, it sounded to me there, unless I'm wrong, that, you have more of a challenge in cleaning the two-dimensional or the film plastic, yet that is the plastic, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that is of less value at times than the rigid.
Yeah, that's true for the most part. Yeah, it's a tough business when you think about it.
So you're putting in more costs, to manage that, yet you're starting at a lower, value proposition. So I can certainly see where that's challenging. And again, perhaps even driven by things such as producer responsibility. So when it comes to the topic of producer responsibility, do you see that as a driver to what you're doing? I mean, do you have any recent examples of that?
Well, it's not really in place as far as I know yet. It is in Canada and Europe. However, we're not part of those ecosystems really. We supply into Canada, but we don't purchase any raw materials from Canada. We're aware of it, and we support it. We extended producer responsibility. We support it. How that's going to manifest itself here in the United States, I think remains to be seen. But it's something that we support without question. In logical ways, it's not going to make sense in every case, but yeah, no, we think that the firms that are involved with putting plastic waste into the environment should bear some responsibility in terms of collecting that material and then helping to recycle it. So we support it. Yeah. But again, how that comes to fruition, I think we have some thoughts. I don't know that. I don't know exactly what's going to happen.
So another thought I just had, as we're talking here, actually one question, and then I'm going to move to perhaps a question that'll help us bring things together and close for the day, as we're coming up on the 2:00 hour. One topic I haven't touched on. I heard the word wash line. I heard the word water wash versus a dry wash. That made me think of the word microplastics, right? Yeah. Okay. In working with your local wastewater plant, has the topic of microplastics from your wash line come up? Is this something that, you think is hurting the plastics industry? I mean, what's the preventive side of this? What's your outlook on it?
It's absolutely a concern, yeah. And to the extent that it's horrible for PR, then yes, it is hurting the industry without question. But I mean, I would say that plastics has a PR problem, and nothing else, right? Now that's a whole nother topic, so we can come back to that if you want.
Sure.
But, in terms of our wash line, it is such a concern for us and such a concern for our local sewer treatment plant that we made the decision to go zero discharge. So we are actually not discharging any water into our wastewater treatment plant infrastructure off of this process. Designing that process, our water treatment plant, as a closed loop was the biggest single hurdle that we had to overcome in order to get into wet washing. So we made a decision we're not discharging for exactly that reason.
Very good. Interesting.
Yeah.
So we do have some of our colleagues from the Department of Environmental Protection and equally recycling coordinators, recycling managers throughout the state of Pennsylvania on the call today. Is there any advice or any interest areas of things that you would like to put out there that can help you run your business? I know you said you're going to be over the next few months looking for sources of two-dimensional or film plastics. What are your needs? What could you get out there to those audiences that might be of help to you?
Boy, I appreciate that. That's a good question. I wasn't expecting. I would say the group you mentioned is aware of the post-consumer streams that we're after. So I would say just general awareness that Ultra Poly is developing solutions for large volume homogeneous streams that have been environmental issues for a long time, but yet are not being recycled through traditional methods. So I'm thinking again about car bumpers, just raising awareness about the idea that there are solutions in place. So we are working with municipalities in New Jersey where they are publicizing the fact that we're recycling bumpers. That's one great out. I think also getting the word out that Ultra Poly is a potential outlet for hoop house, ag films, flower pots. Boat wrap is something that we're working on, geomembrane. Now, what I'm saying here is a double-edged sword, because what we don't want is just we don't necessarily we want to provide the solution, and we're going to be incredibly collaborative around this, but we can't afford to be taking pickup truck fulls of flower pots from the general public, right? So we deal in truckload quantities. So for us, for our logistics to make sense, really, materials need to be consolidated in a homogeneous way at a remote location, and we can send trucks to pick them up. So what we need to be engaging in is discussions around how to collect materials on a local level in a non-contaminated, homogeneous way. So that means like with like. So collection programs that might involve collecting flower pots and only flower pots, bumpers and only bumpers, collecting them, baling them, and then letting us come pick up full truckload quantities. So we need for municipalities to be active kind of participants in the collection effort, really, in order for this to make sense. But that being said, we would love to have these discussions.
And one thing that brings to mind, I won't go too far into it because, as you said, it may involve a follow-up discussion offline, is that Pennsylvania for some years now has a general permit as a rural transfer station permit, where the permit itself is written to collect both waste and recycling, but primarily to capture recycling and also capture waste that may be, open burned or burned in like a rural burning barrel type thing. Or, as was once said, a personal incineration device. But to collect those recyclables, like you mentioned bumpers a few times, to collect those odd materials that, don't fit in a roll cart, don't fit in the blue bin, or go in that type of pathway. So, and the opportunity to locate those strategically, that you could have the opportunity to build volume. So separate discussion, but I think worth a future look possibly. So with that, I don't see a tremendous quantity of questions in our question bank. We are at the 2:00 hour. Should someone want to reach you beyond our conversation today, how do they do that?
Sure. Email is fine. I can give you my email address verbally, or we can follow up with an email.
No, go ahead. Just lay it out there for everyone.
Sure. So it's just dlafiura@ultrapoly.com. So I'll spell that out. So it's D as in David, LaFiura, LAF as in Frank, IURA, at ultra, ULTRA, hyphen poly, POLY.com. So
okay.
Fiura@ultrapoly.com.
Very good. Very good. Well, certainly, again, David, we appreciate quite significantly your involvement with the Recycling Market Center, as well as everyone on today's call. It's been an insight for sure into the circularity of what you're building and the mission that you're upholding in Pennsylvania. So we thank you for that. And should anybody on the call today have follow-up questions for David, please follow up with him or feel free to follow up with the Recycling Market Center. Again, I thank you for joining and have a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you, Bob. And thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate it. Bye now.